Well, time now for our press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half an hour, we'll see what's making headlines with Rachel Cunliffe, Deputy Online Editor of the New Statesman, and Mary Macleod, Chief Executive of Business in the Community. So let's see what's on those front pages. Rishi orders COVID tests on arrival from China. That's the lead story in the Daily Mail after the government had announced new flight restrictions. That story is also the lead in the Daily Telegraph and comes amid fears of a new strain of COVID emerging from China. The Guardian, too, makes it its top story. The Times also has it on the front page, but leads with news that the Chief Medical Officer, Sir Chris Whitty, is worried that the pandemic has led to a big increase in heart deaths because people didn't get statins or blood pressure medicines during lockdown. The New Year's Honour list just announced is the lead for the Mirror with the headline Queen's Honour for Queen guitarist Brian May, who is receiving a knighthood. The Express claims an exclusive with a report that more than 700 prisoners have been wrongly released or escaped over the last 10 years. The Financial Times reports that it's been the worst year since the 2008 financial crisis for global stock markets, with the war in Ukraine and rising interest rates wiping $30 trillion off the value of shares. And not long after one big freeze ended, the Star tells us there's another one on the way in January. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch along with us. Well, tonight, as I said, we're joined by Rachel Cunliffe, Deputy Online Editor of the New Statesman, and by Mary Macleod, Chief Executive of Business in the Community. Mary, Rachel, good to have you both with us this morning. So let's kick off, Mary, with you with the Daily Mirror, and that is looking, as we've been saying, at these new honours list.
Yes, and this is the King's first New Year honours list. And what is always lovely about those lists is that it is about celebration and recognition, allowing us to remind us of the brilliant things that have been done across the country in the past year. And yes, many of the main names are there that you would expect, like Brian May and, of course, Denise Lewis, and no one would argue with them getting the recognition they've got for a lifetime of brilliance. But of course, so many others are, whether it's across education, health, public service, science, business, you know, there are so many others, and especially around community and voluntary service. And those are the stories that are always worth telling. And I think in times that are bad, which, you know, it's been a really tough year. And I think having those stories of what people have done, some amazing things, inspire others to do likewise. So whether it's in a particular field or whether it's in that community and voluntary service, which we saw so much of during COVID, then it's absolutely great that we can recognise that and hear the stories of what all those people have been doing, because I do think it will inspire others to do volunteering. And I just would encourage everyone listening to, you know, recommend people for these honours. It's really important that they're very diverse, that they reach out to all communities right across the country, and therefore do put people up for it where you see just amazing things happening on your doorstep.
Well, I'm going to come back to you with some more detail about that, Mary, and we'll talk to you about some of the previous work you did. I want to bring Rachel in here now. And Rachel, let's look at the front page of the Daily Star. That's, of course, in the sidebar, they've got a line about the honours list and about Brian May, but also a note there about the lionesses. 4 lionesses got gongs, but the rest of the team didn't. And the Star saying a bit of a snub.
Well, firstly, I just want to echo what Mary was saying about the importance and the significance of this in recognition of people who don't normally get recognised across particularly sort of volunteering and public service, and that's really important. But I think the headline story of this honours list probably will be the 4 honours awarded to 4 of the England's women's football team, who obviously were the first England team to win a major footballing tournament with their win in the Euros earlier this year, which is absolutely phenomenal. I think you will get a lot of people though asking why it wasn't the whole team being honoured. I mean, the amount that these women have done for women's football, for women's sport in general, the way they have just raised awareness of the game to a sort of national level, not to mention it being the first tournament in 60 years where England has been successful. That was a team effort. And there are women who have been on that team who for decades have been really putting the work in when it comes to women's football. People like Jill Scott, or indeed, the woman who scored the winning goal against Germany. She's not one of those sort of being honoured. And I just get the sense that maybe had it been the men's team winning a major tournament, the Euros in 2021, for example, that final between England and Italy, you probably would see the whole team being honoured. So there's a little bit of a sour taste in the mouth, even though it is such a phenomenal achievement for them. And
that was Chloe Smith that you're talking about. They scored that winning goal. And I think looking at England teams, this has happened before when not the whole team has been awarded. I had a little read ahead of this, but you're right, it probably will be what lots of people will be talking about. And Mary, as I mentioned, you've got some sort of insight into this. You're a former advisor to the Queen. So I wonder, what can you tell us about the way these sort of things are decided? You said that people should nominate those for honours, but once it gets to the royal household, what's the process there? Will the King have signed off on all of these?
Well, I mean, in essence, there are 10 main committees, and there's an additional honours committee for diversity to make sure that the honours system reflects across UK society. So you do have committees for arts and media, education, economy, community, health, public service, science, technology, sport, state, etc. So there really are experienced people on those, and certainly talking about sport and football. So Hugh Robertson is very experienced as chair of that committee. I mean, his take, I think, has been on it is that it was a European tournament for the Lionesses rather than a world tournament. But I still, I still think the Lionesses are changing the face of women's football, and it needs to be changed. Therefore, I do think it's good that four were recognised, but it is a team sport, and everyone helps each other in that success. So it'd be nice to have seen more of them get a recognition for that, because I think also at the time that the Lionesses came through for us, we all felt it, whether it was people who loved football or didn't, but it just helped Britain feel better, or certainly England feel better. But, so I think it's just really, really important as part of that. But in terms of the process, it goes through those honours committees, it then gets reviewed, and it would have to be something quite extraordinary for something to be pulled out. But hopefully, if people put these women forward again, then they will hopefully get something at some point in the future.
Yeah, and let's just take a look at the front page of the Daily Telegraph. This is the England captain, Leah Williamson, there, who will be getting honoured. And Rachel, just a final thought then from you on this. As we said, it's the first awarding of the honours list by King Charles, and it's 50% women, my understanding. So I guess that is a step forward in terms of the honours that are being given out.
It is a step forward, and for all that I think that the whole of the Lionesses should have been honoured in this case, it is nice to be talking about the positive impacts of these awards. There's so often when it comes to the honours list, we're tied up with the sort of political issues of various special advisors or people who backed the PM or didn't back the PM getting awarded, and it kind of becomes tarnished by that. And it is important to focus on the positive side of it and the significance of this being the first list awarded by the new king. As Prince Charles did award sort of these honours, he did stand in for his mother on multiple occasions. But just like with the first King's speech that we had at Christmas, we're getting a lot of firsts, and we're just sort of slowly getting used to, as a nation, having a king rather than a queen, and we're getting there, I think, slowly.
We certainly are. Rachel, Mary, stay with us for now. I'll be back with you in a moment, and we'll have plenty more from the front pages of the morning's newspaper, including this story on the front page of the Daily Mail, saying that the Prime Minister has ordered COVID tests for people leaving China. You are watching the press preview. With me are Rachel Cunliffe, Senior Associate Editor of the New Statesman, and Mary Macleod, Chief Executive of Business in the Community. Mary, Rachel, thanks for sticking with us. All right, let's dive straight into this story about new restrictions being brought in for people arriving into England from China. Let's look at the front page of the Daily Mail. And Mary, the Mail's saying that this is Rishi's decision to bring in these pre-departure tests and also tests on some passengers on arrival.
Yes, and I think we're following, I guess, the US, Japan, India, and Italy, and then of course UK, France, and Spain are adding those controls on now. I mean, I think it is right to be careful and have the due diligence around this. I guess the main concerns are some of the secrecy in Beijing around the data and understanding of any new variants that are emerging from China. And the government has tried to base things on science and medical advice. So I think what they're trying to do is say, you know, we are not sure on what is happening in Beijing. We're worried about those concerns. We're worrying about the surge in infections after they relaxed their tough pandemic laws. I think Shanghai's had, 5.43 million positive cases last week. So, and there may be more that are asymptomatic. So they're just, as we have to still be careful. We do not want another lockdown in this country, but that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't be vigilant about what other countries are doing and anything that could have a major impact in infections in the UK.
Yeah, and Rachel, this was, as Mary said, it's been brought in another number of other countries prior to this, and it was always going to come here, I guess, but it did seem as recently as yesterday that the government was still kind of reviewing it, still not quite sure whether they were going to bring it in.
It's interesting, isn't it? I was doing another paper review on Wednesday, I think, and Italy and the US had just announced that they were going to start requiring a negative COVID test for arrivals from China. Now that was Wednesday, today's Friday, and you can see the pressure on other governments to bring in these restrictions. Now, there is a point at which we don't know how useful these restrictions are going to be, partly because of the sort of high number of asymptomatic cases, because of it's only relating to direct flights from China. Obviously, if you fly from China somewhere else and then come to the UK, you wouldn't be tested. And so there are all kinds of reasons why it's not a sort of fail-safe strategy. But I do think that once Italy and the US said they were going to, it was kind of inevitable that the rest of Europe would go further. I mean, there have been calls from some European politicians to just ban arrivals from China altogether. It's all sort of feels very circa March 2020. The fact is, as sort of Mary alluded to, it's the lack of information. We don't know enough about the spread of COVID in China at the moment because the Chinese government is not necessarily being as transparent as it could be. It's pursued this zero COVID policy. It's had basically very draconian restrictions, essentially lockdown for much of the last 3 years. They've suddenly opened up. Cases are surging. Their population is not as vaccinated as other countries are. Suddenly people are travelling again. We don't know if it's mutated. We don't know what the risks are. And after the last 3 years, I think governments are right to be worried. Whether or not we should feel more secure because these restrictions have come in is another matter.
Yeah, let's pick up on some of that, if we can, Mary. Looking at the front page of The Guardian, they're framing it as a U-turn by Rishi Sunak. Speaking to Professor Paul Hunter earlier, he said to me that these restrictions might not make any difference in kind of controlling variants coming in, and did suggest this could be political. I mean, what's your read on it? How political is it? Because obviously Rishi Sunak very against bringing in any new restrictions.
Yes, but I think this is not restrictions on the British public, it's restrictions on those coming into the country, which of course there might be some Brits within that, but we all had to do it over the course of the last years or during the COVID times when we were allowed to travel, so it's not unusual. But I think there is a worry, lots of other countries are doing it, so that might have put pressure on the government. There's also been a public poll where I think it's about 70% of the public are backing this. And there's always fears about new strains. And, you know, there's huge pressures on our NHS at the moment, especially in the winter time. And therefore, I think that diligence and being really focused on making sure there is no more further strains coming into the country. Of course, the UK government has to work with the devolved governments too, but there are no direct flights from China that go direct into Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. But they'll still try and get similar policies there and to follow the same rules.
Yeah, trying to get some agreement across the devolved nations. All right, let's look at the front page of the Times, Rachel, if we can. And this is a story by that's reporting on an interview, a conversation with Sir Chris Whitty. Just lay out for us what this is. And this is all about health and pressures on the service.
About pressures on the service, but particularly about the pandemic's impact on a number of areas of healthcare. So this is Chris Whitty saying that the increase in deaths from heart disease is partly a result of the pandemic, which interestingly is something that he said right at the beginning before we even went into lockdown. I remember the interview where he said we will see excess deaths as a result of lockdowns that are imposed to reduce the spread of COVID. And the argument is that during lockdowns, when people were encouraged to stay at home, obviously, but also to not go see their doctor unless it was an emergency, people didn't get diagnosed with conditions which, had they been diagnosed with them earlier, they could be treated for them. So there is worry that people who would have been ordinarily been diagnosed and been prescribed medication to deal with heart conditions, also indeed sort of cancer diagnoses and cancer treatment, those people didn't get diagnosed, they didn't turn up, they didn't want to put extra pressure on the NHS at a time of COVID, they didn't want to catch COVID themselves, and now it's too late, and we are seeing excess death as a result of that. Now, obviously, that's only part of the story. Part of the story is also how overloaded the NHS is, everything from A&E to your GP to everything in between, and getting treatment and getting diagnosed and making sure that the process is working smoothly. There are problems at every stage of that at the moment. But I think it is significant that Chris Whitty is sort of acknowledging that our behaviour during COVID may have led to misdiagnosis, and we are seeing the impact of that now.
OK, Rachel, Mary, do appreciate your time this hour. Thank you very much for being with us.